Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and this is stage 62 of Shadowland, debuting the newest uniform for Black Widow. How much does it change over Infinity War if that's the one that you already have? And if you don't have any uniform for Black Widow, what can you expect and what are you going to get out of her? And unfortunately, for better or for worse, I think Shadowland is probably the best bet for Black Widow. And I'll explain why after, but for now, because we're debuting off her skills, it's better to go into what they actually changed about her skills. We're generally trying to proc on the 4th skill, if that's what you're wondering what my rotation is, but otherwise, let's get into it. So the first change they made is with her 4th skill. It now gives her 2 seconds of immunity, and they basically just completely reworked the animation for the skill. She jumps forward, she does a backflip, and the damage is quite a bit better. The 3rd skill and the 2nd skill, they left completely the same. It's both iframes and both with the same number of hits. And then the 3rd skill pops out these 2 batons that will guard break indefinitely, which is really nice, specifically for Shadowland. You can kind of keep enemies locked in place, and you don't even have to attack. But 2 and 3 are unchanged. 1, on the other hand, 1 is that skill that kind of bounces around. 1 is it has a lot more hits now. It's much more bouncy, and so it's even easier to ricochet and kind of catch 2 or 3 or more enemies at once. So it does make for a nicer AoE skill. Speaking of AoE, they also improved the AoE on her 5th skill. They also added more hits to her 5th skill, so her 5th skill will hit harder, and it will hit a larger area, which is what AoE refers to. So she got a buff damage on 4 and 2 seconds of immunity. She got more damage in AoE on her 5th skill, and she got additional AoE or additional tracking, additional hits on her 1st skill. However, I cleared this stage with about a minute and 10 seconds left, a minute and 15 seconds left, so it's like a 1.5 to 1 minute 45 second clear. However, it's just not enough. And we'll get into the rest of the uniform because they actually did quite a few changes for Black Widow, but it's just not enough. So they're on the right track, they just didn't go far enough. They pushed all the right buttons, they just need to push them harder or push more of them. Or I don't know if it's a lever analogy, they just need to crank the levers. Instead of going to 7, they need to go to 10. Nebula, on the other hand, is a little bit different. So rather than having 2 skills that are the same, we're going to do the same stage 62 to show them off because they're both, you know, lightning type characters. They're both female. They're now both superheroes. For Nebula, they added quite a few changes. So they added they added an iframe on her 4th skill. They added a guard hit on her 2nd skill. Her 1st skill now throws out these little lightning coils, and that's kind of the major, I think that was the major rework of Nebula. They wanted to see these cool little lightning coils on the ground. So aesthetically, in terms of how cool the skills look, I have to say that it's a 10 out of 10 for me for Nebula. She has some of the coolest skills in the game now. She's rivaling Thor with how cool it looks with all this blue and with all these little lightning coils running around. And you can get, you know, almost hundreds of these babies flying around. I actually died. You can get tons of these little lightning coils flying around all the time. Her survivability is still a little bit sketchy because she can't really take a hit, but they did add quite a bit to improve her survivability. So we're going to try again here. She keeps her iframe on 5. Her 5th skill deals more hits now, and it also has a hidden buff. So I want you guys to focus here on the top, Frenzy. She gets a 20% attack, 20% crit rate buff with immune to incapacitation every 7 seconds with her 5th skill, Frenzy. So it's a nice little hidden buff that adds a little bit of additional damage to the character. So if you're trying to get extra mileage out of your Nebula, make sure you incorporate her 5th skill into every rotation, even if you're not proccing on it, because you want to deal the most damage. And that 20% attack, 20% crit rate, or I think it's 22 and 22, is really going to help you. So that's one of the big changes, is that her 5th skill got this extra buff. Her 2nd skill now has an 8 guard hit. Her 4th skill now has an iframe. I keep wanting to say immunity. Her 4th skill now has an iframe there as she jumps up, and it also has lightning resistance down. So basically what that means is she, like Scarlet Witch and like other characters, Thor's 6th skill, she now lowers the lightning resistance of enemies. It stacks up to minus 30%, and you can kind of see that as a mini all defense down. It's not quite as good as all defense down, but it is still very good for the character, and it does allow her to amplify her damage. So you definitely want to incorporate the 4th skill as well. However, in terms of absolute damage, her best damage skill is actually her 3rd skill. which is quite interesting. So if you guys were wondering, for all you Nebula fans out there, you definitely want to stack the 4th skill and then go into your 3rd skill in order to get that extra damage. You can incorporate 2 as well because it has the guard hit, but basically now Nebula has 4 skills that are useful to her. 2 gives the guard hit, 3 has the great damage, 4 has the iframe and the lightning defense down, or the lightning resist down, and then 5 has the pretty powerful 20/20 self buff and the iframe AoE. In general, I was clearing this stage faster with Nebula. It was taking about 1.5 minutes to 1 minute and 40 seconds. So with pretty similar builds, I would say that Nebula probably has a bit more damage output than Black Widow, which kind of makes sense with the lightning resistance down. It also synergizes a lot better with her kit in general because she has 5 skills that deal lightning damage, whereas Black Widow only has 2 skills. So in general, giving Black Widow a lightning damage obelisk is going to be less effective than giving Nebula that same obelisk. To be fair, their builds are not identical. Black Widow has a very defensive build with only a 160 proc with no offensive stats, whereas Nebula has my old Thor obelisk, which is lightning, crit, damage, and a 180 proc. However, there's more to Black Widow's uniform than just the skill changes. Nebula, on the other hand, I don't believe she has any buffs. Actually, she has a 20% increased lightning damage, and they've changed around some of her passives. I believe, no. So yes, she does get an extra 20% from her uniform bonus, which is good, but Black Widow's uniform bonus is quite a bit better. It not only changes her passive, Graceful Dancer, but it gives her a flat 15% crit rate and crit damage. So it's going to be a lot easier with this uniform versus any of your other uniforms to cap her crit rate and her crit damage. She could be kind of a sleeper pick for a CTP of Rage if anyone was brave enough to test that, because it's very easy to cap dodge and crit. I'm actually purposely avoiding not capping these skills, but I could easily cap both of them and still have a healthy amount of crit damage. And I mean, if you look at the obelisk, we could swap some of that dodge round for crit damage and crit rate, and she could easily be at 75, 75, 200. Additionally, her Graceful Dancer passive now just gives her a flat 10% dodge plus 5% physical attack. So she's got a lot of additional stats: 15 crit damage, 10% dodge, 5% physical attack. But even with all that, it's just not enough. She doesn't have any positive self buffs. She does have additional dodge here on riposte, but she has no positive buffs, all attack buffs, crit rate buffs, etc. And she doesn't have any debuffs on the enemy. Combine that with the fact that she doesn't have iframe ignore and she doesn't have penetration, and you basically just can't use her for high level world boss, and you can't use her for PvP because she doesn't have any of those meta abilities. She's got none. She's a very vanilla character. They definitely need to give her something to make her a little bit more unique, because she's probably one of the more boring characters to play, and it really just pushes her to, you know, Shadowland only. You could try to use her in PvP, but if you're going to fight characters with high heal, or if you're going to fight Captain Marvels, you're basically going to die 9 or 10 times out of 10 because she just can't keep up. She doesn't have enough damage to one-shot, she doesn't have any penetration unless you give her a CTP of Destruction, and then she can't hang long enough to survive because it's not like she's rocking Ant-Man levels of guaranteed dodge and regular dodge, and she doesn't have as much survivability as other characters like Spider-Man. So it really just puts her in a bit of an awkward place. I'm not sure what they want to do with Black Widow, but they should give her a bit more of a kind of spy's powers. And if you compare her to Winter Soldier, and they're pretty similar, I would say. Winter Soldier has a lot more where the hell is Winter Soldier? He has so much more utility with his kit. I mean, he's got, you know, decreased all speed, he's got a self buff. On here, he's got accumulation with immunity, so that's really nice. The accumulation allows you to scale your damage, and you purposely stand in the way of damage in order to, you know, hit harder. 4th skill, I don't even have to talk about this, but this is penetration plus iframe ignore plus an iframe plus ignore dodge, and then his 5th skill's got this crazy AoE with the self buffs. So this is like, Winter Soldier is basically the complete opposite of Black Widow, whereas he doesn't necessarily have a lot of stat buffs on his passives and things like that, and on his uniform he doesn't have any self buffs for stats. He's got crazy self buffs in terms of what his skills will give him, and then he also has very nice debuffs: fear for enemies, for explosive sabotage. So he's useful in pretty much all game modes. Black Widow, I don't know. Alliance Conquest, I guess, is where you could use her. Nebula, on the other hand, I'm a little bit happier with what they've done with her, although, again, like Black Widow, my criticism is that they could have gone further. Neither one of these characters is going to creep into the meta, and they're just going to end up being niche characters that are used if you really like them. Now, like Black Widow, I don't think Nebula has any place in PvP, but for PvE, you can definitely use her. She's got the lightning resistance down. That absolutely helps, and that will stack against world bosses. You can stack it against Ebony and others. Not that she's good against Ebony because she deals physical damage, but you can definitely do more damage with your lightning. She's okay against Proxima, and you can also use her against Corvus as well. I don't know how she's going to do against her dad, but she functions. She's definitely a functional character, whereas before this uniform, she was not. With her regular look or her classic look, she was basically dumpster tier. Now she can actually hang with the kids and do something, whether it's Alliance Conquest, Shadowland, or World Boss. I think you're going to be maybe a bit surprised, maybe a little bit impressed with Nebula. I had quite a bit of practice with her before she got her rework, so I can see the jump. I wish the jump was a little bit higher, but it's still good enough. So you got the guard hit. You definitely want to max out Sudden Strike to level 6. So you get an 8 guard hit for 8 seconds. Vicious Spree, for some reason, does the most amount of damage, even though it's only 29%. And then Static Overdrive you got for the iframe and the resistance, lightning resistance down. And then Shooting Star has this hidden buff, and it's quite interesting. It's not listed anywhere on the skill. It's not listed anywhere in the uniform effect. I don't know if it's a... it's not even listed as a... I mean, it's listed as a skill change, but that's it. It's not listed here. So I'm not sure if it's an accidental buff. I'll keep it. I want it. And I don't know. Maybe if you level up this skill, it even levels up the buff. I never even tried that. Maybe someone can waste more gold and try and see if that 22% buff goes up even higher. Maybe it's 30-30. But with that buff in mind, you don't want to push her crit rate beyond 55%, because then you'll be over the cap when she activates that buff. And with the 7-second cooldown with 13 here, you can have that buff up all the time. So it's basically a flat 20% buff to her attack and a flat 20% buff to her crit rate, which is pretty nice and also helps her cap out her other skills. She's not going to be able to cap out dodge the way that Black Widow does, but you can get pretty far, and she's got at least one really good uniform option that pretty much everyone has. She's got another one that's okay if you're working on Wolverine's X-Force uniform, because this is an option. Whereas I think in Black Widow's case, she has a lot of good options here. She's got Inferno. That one's a little bit tougher to rank up. Gamora, Rocket, and Ghost. Yeah, so quite a bit of kind of paywall, semi-paywall type characters here on Black Widow's uniform, but then we do have Rocket in the second slot. Overall, I think both of these ladies are serviceable. I think Nebula gets the bigger jump than Black Widow. Overall, I think they're pretty neck and neck as far as where they stand now, but before Black Widow was semi-useful and Nebula was not useful at all. So if you only had to pick one uniform, I would personally go with Nebula. The only other gripe, the only other complaint that I have about this uniform is that it makes her a superhero. And yeah, we watched Endgame. She does become a superhero. She does help the Avengers and whatever. They even call her an Avenger now. Rocket says you're an Avenger now. But yeah, we need more villains, Netmarble. What are you doing? You were on a roll with Minerva and Sabretooth and Juggernaut. You did Thanos well. You served the Mad Titan, but then you take away one of our only good female villains. Give her back. I'm serious. Make another uniform. Give Nebula the Infinity Gauntlet, like from the Infinity Gauntlet comic series, and make her a villain again. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think of the Lightning Sisters. They literally have the exact same stance now as well. Subscribe if you enjoy the content and you want to support me. And of course, if you like what you see, I hope to see you again tomorrow. Take care.